Hello, Maria. How are you?
Hello, Derek.
I'd like to just ask you about a little bit, if you could give us some background on your personal history.
I think that the most important thing I would like to start with is that I was born into a family of artists. My mother and my father both are artists, and they are both Christians. And I also have a brother. So I basically grew up in a studio, you could say. We lived in Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, now it's Czech Republic and Slovakia, in a very industrial town and in sort of very humble conditions, I would say. But art was around always, and so I kind of naturally gravitated towards wanting to be an artist, and I wanted to study at an academy where my parents studied in Prague. It was Fine Arts Academy, and my parents are really a major part of me actually becoming an artist and continuing to live as an artist, because they encouraged me and they helped me, and they were my teachers, my first important teachers. So also they were great examples for me of living faith, Christian faith, and they continue to be that for me because they're still alive, they're in their 80s, and so I would say that that's kind of where the background to why my work has become oriented towards the theme of the body and the love of the human figure and nature has been stepping from that background of education from background also European painting, figurative painting, and the tradition. So I think that's what I would like to say.
In your own personal experience, would you say that kind of the oppression of the Nazis and then the communists of the Czech people stimulated kind of you to a deeper commitment to Christ?
I would say that maybe for me personally that did not happen then yet when I was living there, but what the experience that my parents, especially my father, who was in prison for political reasons in the 50s, and then later on actually my husband, who also was a dissident. So their experiences are, really part of what formed my, just my awareness of what that reality can actually mean, because they went through, my parents that is, experienced the Nazi occupation and the war, and then the change over to the communist regime, and that I have grown up with all kinds of stories and incidents that from people talking about, and I've experienced some of that, the result of that oppression or the control of the regime that is the totalitarian regime with Marxist or communist philosophy that allows only certain kind of thinking, and that totally infiltrated the education. That I experienced on my own, and I remember that very well until today, very fresh. What that meant is that there really was not really any freedom, and when somebody would express their different way of thinking, especially if one was a Christian, then it did lead to different ways of persecution. Sometimes people ended up in prison or in some labor camp, or they just made the life the official. It could be, clerks or just the apparatus of the regime would make life very miserable. For example, you might not be able to actually continue to study even if your marks were excellent in high school. You would not be able to go to continue studies, you would not be able to travel, or, So, in that sense, then we also knew some underground church. Some church was officially, the state tolerated existence of certain kind of denomination, because there is really a very long and powerful tradition of Christian history of Christian church but because it was kind of suppressed, or there were attempts at suppressing it by the communists. They tried to almost wipe out that history and kind of pervert it or change it, like, let's say, the way we were studying history was completely from the perspective of the scientific materialism.
Could you just comment on some of your teaching experiences at OCAD in relation to kind of your Christian beliefs and your Christian witness and your expression of your Christianity in your art?
Well, I would say there is no official ban on expressing one's faith, but the general environment these days, it seems like, is that almost anything else is kind of then Christianity is more tolerated and welcomed of expressions of all kinds of other spirituality, especially the darker it is. And we can see that actually even in the art, like in what is often promoted or accepted as sort of the trendiest or the so-called contemporary art. Often one sees that or can detect a spirit in there that is
Toxic.
Toxic in sense, yeah. There's like this leaning towards something, perverted or something strange, or not in a sense more like a darker kind of. And even that would not necessarily be something bad, I think, but it just, the extremes of these expressions are so prevalent in contemporary art that you see like really extremes, especially in some of the installation arts and so on. And when you have piles of meat or somebody lying, or have urine and a crucifix combined and things, all kinds of especially now in this sort of performance art. So that worldview, I guess you could say, is very much present at an institution such as OCAD.
Sure.
That encourages, the type of art that questions, especially, and I've heard this even in the liberal arts, that Christianity is viewed as something very reactionary and is not definitely viewed with great respect, and it's not actually even really part of the curriculum, where actually it could be would have a chance to be represented and explained, or actually part of education. And this is what is kind of troubling. And although I think that there's been some introduction of some courses that at least discuss and examine main world religions, which was not there before. Now there is a course like that, but you could see that, especially since one looks at the history of Western art, most of it, like there's such a big proportion of that history that is filled with Christian themes and imagery, especially the figurative art, and that we do not have a course that would actually address it with a perspective that is sympathetic, at least, to the content of the book, where we have most of the way it's looked at and examined is with a very critical and from point of view of, let's say, some contemporary philosophical, postmodern, and maybe feminist, or many kind of perspectives that seem to, in a way, ignore the environment from which where that art was created, and especially the actual recognition of that the message of the gospel was taken seriously and sincerely by many artists, or that it was not only because the church was would commission these these great works of art beyond words, that people are obviously, if they take time to look at these works of art that they are moved by it, and something is really communicating, and most of it I would say is love. You know, that's it, and so that's why I would hope that it would be great if someone like John Franklin, for example, or you could teach at OCAE a class, that would be like that would relate and present that art in a different atmosphere or
Sure.
or perspective.
Sure. Maria, concerning the kind of the roots of your art in Christianity, I understand that Leonardo was a major influence on you, and I was wondering if you could just briefly tell us about that.
Well, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and many great artists like that continue to be great teachers, and so one of the amazing documents that one can look into is the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, and there are some sections of it that are on the artist's life or on painting, and just most amazing observations of nature, comparison of proportions. Like, it's just like an amazing look into the mind of this genius, this amazing person, and it is really something to consider that someone who had this kind of ability to think and observe and to create all kinds of not only art but also scientific, all kinds of inventions, that had a profound faith in God and in Christ. So there's one quote that has been with me since I became a Christian, which was like in my early 20s. So I just wanted to share that with you because it continues, and I do share that also with my students. So this is the sentence. For painting is the way to learn to know the maker of all marvelous things. And this is the way to love so great an inventor. So I thought, like, how well is this expressed, in a very original way?
Sure. Yes.
And there's another quote by Michelangelo that I have to find for you, which is also, he wrote also poetry, Michelangelo, and he expressed his feeling, that in a gist sort of says something that even painting does not equal that which Christ did for us on the cross. That nothing compares to that work.
I was wondering if you could comment on that conflict, that tension that between the body and the spirit, and how that kind of theme comes out in your work.
Yeah, that's a really great observation and thought, and it just is something that one could do a thesis on.
A couple maybe.
Yeah, whole life, and I think that it does. It has so many aspects that, one aspect for me is, maybe it's not quite totally answering your question, but it is that relationship between the body and the spirit, or the flesh and the spirit, and it is that it has been, not just for me but for other artists, this amazing preoccupation in painting, which is a visual art, and that is between the physical and the spiritual, and that the physical, that is the body, symbolizes or can be the expression of that which is internal and inner, the inner being represented by the physical, not only the way we see the body, but let's say even the anatomy and all kinds of. So for me, the human figure is like the most wonderful expression of the creation of God, and which on the other hand can also be the expression at our will of something beautiful and leaning towards God or searching for God, but also an expression of evil and the darkness. And there's many examples of artists using the figure to show even the spiritual reality of, let's say, of death and spiritual death, and life and spiritual life. So there's also room for that conflict between the strife within a human being, between the flesh and the spirit, and it's like an inner battle, and I just at that point I would like to mention one thing is that I didn't always look for this kind of expression of the Christian faith. It's evolved gradually through my especially observation of the world, or the reality, because that's my work is really based in that, and that's going back to the quote by Leonardo. It is that it's through observation, through looking, and through trying to express that we are actually acquiring knowledge, and not only the knowledge of those things that we are painting or looking at, but through those works or through those manifestations of creation, we are really getting to know the Creator. And that's why that process of creativity, and the whole creative process is so fascinating, because it is part of also God's creation. And it's one of the most wonderful gifts that we have from the Creator, is that in so many different ways we can be creative in millions of different ways.
Sure.
And it's only that mystery of how can that be facilitated, how can it be helped to flourish and to be expressed, and when it is expressed, it is also inspiring other people also to find possibilities within themselves. And that does not end with one thing, but one thing leads to another, and it continues in a sense with much hard work.
Sure.
And a certain discipline and overcoming. It's something that kind of relates totally to life. So I see that like creative process of, let's say, painting, drawing, working with models, or looking at nature, especially, that teaches us always. And I remember this one wonderful drawing by Francisco Goya, whose works I was able to see this year, like amazing things in the Prado Museum. Great painter of imagination, and he did this little drawing towards the end of his life that is an old man with long beard and on crutches, and as Goya used to really like to write under the drawings always some kind of proverbs or some thought, like he was very unique in that way. So he wrote underneath, "Aún aprendo," I am still learning. And that's one of the other things.
Yes.
Show it to my students who think like that in a year they can paint, and that's it, so then I say, I'll show them the little drawing and a little
Always
reminder, and I can feel that more and more.
Now, I just wonder to what extent kind of that non-Christian root of portraiture is in tension with the Judeo-Christian and specifically the gospel message that you see as central in your own art.
I understand what you're asking, but I think that when we consider the works themselves, without, let's say, we would know like what was behind, a lot of the classical art really presents the human figure in a, you could say, very beautiful way. I mean, the idea of beauty is what is to me like almost the central kind of theme there, like in a certain kind of idealization, not always, but quite a lot of it, both Greek and the Roman, but there is also, in relation to, let's say, like, statuary, Greek sculptures and so on, there's some also portraiture, which is then much more individual, that is really seeking to represent the individual. And in that sense, there I see a real connection, because we know that many of the early Greek, and was part of their education, and Roman sculptures to draw from them, and it still continues actually for some educators these days, that they do look at those sculptures and marvel at their, I think what was, marvel at their knowledge of the body, even in before times of any kind of knowledge of anatomy, so I think that there, to me, it seems like there's a certain continuation in the Renaissance, the seeking to represent the individual and the particular personality is kind of, actually in harmony with what was coming, what they took, those artists took from the earlier art. And, whether what has happened to the portraiture, like in, let's say, 20th century, that's another chapter altogether, 20th century. And today, I think it's, to summarize it, because it's a huge theme, is only a testimony as to that the artists, always there are some artists that seem to be fascinated by the personality and what is an individual. And in that sense, I think that is connected in that sense to Christian thinking or philosophy that values the individual and that there's no one like that person,
Sure.
that God loves the individual, but it's different in the sense from maybe some of the Renaissance approach philosophy is that the individual in Christianity is not the center of the universe, and it's not the egoism, and it's not that kind of self admiration and self-importance and so on, which it can become when, we see examples of that these days
Right.
so much, so I don't know if that answers your question.
Now, anyone can kind of make a reasonable image, and kind of, it doesn't take much skill to make a fantastic image. So that the efforts of kind of modern art to shock, to kind of, is an attempt to kind of sort of re-grasp what was lost through the kind of the technical revolution in the reproduction of images.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what's going on. It's like just the whole question of really what is considered art these days. I think it has brought a lot of confusion into society, and in some ways it does reflect what is happening in the society and the question of values. Because if you remove all values, then and we have witnessed that, like anything that someone can market as art and put $12 million on it and convince a certain circle of a certain environment that it's worth that, like a stuffed shark, for example, like Damien Hirst.
Sure.
So then there's a lot of confusion, I think, among the public also that goes to the galleries and see whatever is then represented as art. You can have like dead flies, put in some tar, or cigarette butts, and like that has, I think, relates to what you mentioned about the shock value and the desperation on the part of many artists that is actually a result of an environment. It's not just individuals. It's something that is actually, we have to, I believe, see it as part of the way the society and where the world is now. That it is a reflection. Now, the thing is that in the past, the artists, like let's say you go to the Renaissance or any 18th, 19th century, those artists also lived in a world where there was wars, there was violence, there were diseases, there was a lot of negative things happening.
Sure.
And some of that is reflected in the art, but the artists also had amazing vision and powerful ways of expressing that, to show, to go beyond just representing and reflecting the miseries in the world. Uplifting. And it was not something sentimental and superficial and something we could call kitsch.
Sure.
It was, and so it's good to study and look at examples of great art of maybe all different cultures and see what actually, that art communicates. And I think that sometimes there is like almost no emphasis on that these days, especially in art education, that is something important to consider, like what is actually the message or what is the idea. The thing is that often people don't have any ideas, and it's just like a vehicle for self-expression, and whatever comes out is what that is art.
Sure.
So it's a different approach, and one has to we have to understand that and not to ignore it. But for me, it is really an important question, because I have really been sincerely seeking how to represent the different stories, parables, images that are in God's Word, in the Bible. It's a fascination for me that is not, that is coming from my heart, and that is my sincere desire, because they are such powerful, for example, the teachings of Jesus, the parables, or you look in the book of Revelation, or Proverbs, or there's like so much actually portrayed visual in it, through the words in a visual. It's like paintings in words.
Right.
And so how, for me the challenge is like how to find ways to represent that in a contemporary way. That is, in the language that I'm capable of, with my own limitations.
Right.
But something that, that's kind of what I've been working in the last, maybe 20 years or so. That Body Broken, Body Redeemed, that collection or selection of my works is definitely preoccupied with just the body itself as a vehicle of expression, communicating that in some way that hopefully will touch someone and speak to them and make them, maybe provoke them or make them wonder about, that it is possible to find amazing message that is very powerful in the gospel. And that's
proclaiming the gospel through art. Proclaiming the gospel through art.
But without, being, how would you say, preachy kind of, in a negative way. Like, I don't mean that preaching is negative, but, like I want to be on the level, like I'm from the position of the most miserable, humble, sinner.
Like the Apostle Paul.
Yes.
Yes.
So from that place, just being, I think, a witness. I mean, that's what I hope to communicate.
Right. Good. Speaking of witnesses, would you like to show some of your art of your parents, kind of some of the roots of your own art, some of the portraiture?
Okay, so here is, for example, one of my mother's. It's just a reproduction. I don't know if you have, if it shows well. It's a reproduction of a slightly smaller than life-size painting. So I just want to show you some of, this is one of my mother's also, mother and child. So these are mostly acrylic or oil paintings. And so my parents have exhibited all their life, first in Czechoslovakia and then in Canada. And this was a portrait of, one of the examples of a portrait of an actress. They do look, of course, different in original. Like the texture of the paint is somewhat lost on when you see it like in a small. And so then I just want to show you a few of my father's, because he's been really, they also have been painting landscapes and other subject matter, but the portraiture, like these are charcoal drawings that are done from sitters, from life series. Like, so they are not done from photographs, and often the drawings were preparatory studies. For example, like this here, you can see the one is a drawing and the other one is a painting of this young woman that was living as a neighbor with my parents. Her name was Heidi, and then here's a few more. Like you can see, my father also did some important commissions, like Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. One photograph here, but this was, as you can see, it says a Rembrandt for you. It was, and the photograph was taken at the stage of when it was in progress. It was a life-size copy painted from Rembrandt's Night Watch, from different reproductions. My father did a lot of research on Rembrandt, and then it was commissioned by this Hotel Rembrandt in Vancouver. And then my father first did like different officers, or this is changing of the guard, right? That's what it is. And he did first preparatory studies in charcoal, beautiful sketches of some of the main characters. And then he actually painted it in the lobby of that hotel, so people actually could watch him work on it. So it was a very interesting, and there is like a whole story about that project. So there's a few of the images from my parents' work, which I wanted to share with you because they were always my teachers and critics and encouraged me. Encouragement is one of the most important, I think, things in life, and for a young artist or any artist to be encouraged.
And I just wondered if you could comment briefly on kind of why it is that portraiture seems to have kind of generated this interest in the broader culture, and other forms of art seem not to have. For example, history painting seems to be dead, and kind of landscape painting is it's still present, but it's not flourishing, and still life painting is not quite flourishing. But what is it about portraiture that you would attribute the recent sort of interest in it in the broader culture over the last 20 years?
Perhaps one of the things could be the internet. The media allowed or facilitate broader distribution and kind of accessibility of a lot of these works of artists that perhaps were practicing and active as portrait artists, or part of their practice was also portraiture, but maybe they were not represented in galleries, or maybe they were not reviewed, which happens often, that like overlooked, and then this internet probably enabled them to share, like just to put a website, and then when people see that, like then their interest probably was then kindled by that, because I think that and through that maybe more young artists became more interested in studying portraiture when they see that there are some other people that maybe are creating very beautiful works of art, or very provocative, or new, exploring new ways of doing portraiture. Then one thing leads to another, and it grows, because then people see, oh, I'm not isolated, I'm not alone, in this, because there's a lot of different trends in the art world and the kind of establishment. And when you have critics, 2 or 3 critics in a city, and they never, absolutely ever, review something, like because they have their own prejudices and their own limited knowledge sometimes, So then it's like the public might not even be aware of, something like what happened with, for example, that Canadian company that did the story, the series on the Bravo, like star portraits. I mean, the original idea was from Britain. It was a very successful show in Britain that they did that same format, that 3 artists would have a chance to meet with some well-known person and represent them in whatever way, like painting, drawing. And so then they really liked this, the Canadian company, and they said they will do their own way of presenting that. And obviously it was successful because they did another whole series. Right. And that I know that even the students at OCAD, quite a few of them saw it, and some of them were actually in it. And I think that contributes to a growth and encouragement of that kind of. So it's an interesting way how this happened.
Really. Well, I think that perhaps brings our interview to a close. Thank you very much on behalf of the Christian Cultural Transformation Partnership for your most stimulating ideas, and we wish you all the very best in your future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek, and thank you for your great questions. That will make me think now, and I wish everyone all the best at the conference, and may God bless you all.
Amen.